This is the first and what we're hoping is going to be a great series. We're calling it the Artist Series, where we're almost think of it like inside the actor studio. We're going to sit down with artists and just kind of talk about their life and work and listen to some songs off their vinyl, and then hopefully, also hear a couple of live songs. Our first artist in the series is Mr. Nat Myers. Kentucky native who is about to release his debut album on Easy Eye Records. Comes out June 23rd, entitled Yellow Peril.
Yes, sir.
You want to explain a little bit about the title?
Oh, yeah. Yellow Peril is kind of like it's an old ideological term from the turn of the century last century, that particularly had to do with the rise in fear of the Oriental generally in the West. It was much more pronounced in the 20th century, like up until I think it was the 60s where the Immigration Acts came into play. But if you were from certain Asian countries, you couldn't even come here. So that's kind of like the origin from it. And I started writing it partially. It's the lead single on the album. I started writing it out of my own butchering's Boll Weevil Blues by Charlie Patton. That's kind of like my big inspiration for that piece, and even kind of the narrative structure of how he operates within that song, I think definitely lend itself a little to what I do. I think it's curious, I don't know if the song or this particular thing, Dan was like, you can name it something else if you want, but I was real dead set on Yellow Peril. And honestly, looking back on where I was a year ago, I don't want to knock it all off to ignorance, but as the songs come out and I've been able to engage and talk with more Asian folks, I realized how little I kind of understood the concept myself. So it's kind of a in the moment learning experience for me. Yeah.
It's interesting. It was rooted in this idea of Asian Americans being persecuted, but you're probably about as American as anybody I can think of.
Yeah.
You're from Kansas.
Yeah, right.
And grew up mostly in Kentucky, is that right?
Yeah, no,
so you
yeah.
still live in Kentucky?
Yeah, so actually I moved down to Collierville when I was about like 3 or 4. It was before preschool. I lived up here until I think first grade, like over here in Collierville. Then I moved up to Kentucky, when I was real young, like first grade or something like that. But yeah, no, it's. I think it's interesting, especially when I go to folks who are like, I recently went to Hawaii and all these kind of these more like these cultures with definitely a much more diverse demographic, and like my own grappling with my own color and like what race actually means has been an ongoing process that I feel like I kind of discovered a little later in life. I wouldn't say nobody kind of gave me too many knocks, but the knocks were definitely there, but it was almost like I didn't pay no attention to them, It weren't until like, maybe over the past 10 years of my 20s, and maybe this goes for a lot of folks, where you started paying attention to that kind of stuff. I read this fellow named Frantz Fanon, who's got this book called Black Face, White Mask. And I felt like there was a lot of context in terms of what I kind of had grown up with, when you have this kind of weird double consciousness of living your life. And yeah, so yeah, it comes from, yeah, it's, I don't know, it's weird, but I'm always curious about what the concept of feeling like an exile in your own land's like. It don't really depend on no color, you can just not fit in somewhere, or just be out of the mode. You can play the blues when everyone's playing pop, it's easy to get like otherized generally. So it's just kind of like a little exploration of that.
Now, we were talking earlier about first records. You want to tell everybody what your first record was?
Oh, Jesus, yeah. Y'all got to tell me y'all's first record, though. That's the exchange. And then we all have to, do a suicide pact. Can't talk about it. No, my first record was Millennium by Backstreet Boys. Yeah. My second record was Get Rich, Die Trying, the clean version by 50 Cent. Yeah. So those are my, I'm not embarrassed about them anymore. It's the truth. Yeah. So
you came to the blues though through your father's collection, is that right?
Yeah, my dad listened to a lot of different music. I didn't really pay too much attention to much of it except the old blues, but I remember we used to travel a lot when I was younger, and we went out west, and I remember he had I don't even know what blues compilation it was, but there was this one track called Old Time Blues by Carl Martin. And I just thought it was like the most peculiar sounding thing. I loved the way he played it, and I loved like how candy the notes were. And there's a lot of different kind of in ways into like why I started playing the music, but I could definitely say like I had somebody who was at least taught me the appreciation on what the sound is, I guess. So yeah.
But you didn't start really playing blues until you got to it in a weird way, kind of through poetry.
Yeah, no, yeah. Poetry's kind of been my in-way into everything. I feel like when I was real young, I wanted to be a poet, and I think I'll die a poet, whatever that means. I think in my own experience, I met so many poets when I was out on the road with G-Love, to where I can't speak in absolutes no more, but at least in my own experience as a poet, I think the best thing I could have done was start playing guitar and busking and really exploring that kind of that Homeric or old school poetry, that epicness of what song can be. And I think especially when it comes to pre-war blues, and not just blues, but hillbilly music too, you have a lot of this legacy of the American epic story being told by these various voices who have contact with the muses. So it was just like, it's kind of like me falling deeper into my own legacy, I guess, or like what I want to be my legacy. Because, I foolishly at one point, like, I used to tell myself, it's like, I ain't 27 yet, so like Shakespeare didn't write his first play till he's 27. I'm doing okay, you know what I mean? I'm 32 now, so I don't got no excuses. I just tell myself like, well, like T-Model 4 got a record deal when he's 70, so I guess I'm doing all right, you know? Right? But, generally speaking, I'm not as arrogant as I used to be when I was younger, so I don't think so highfalutin, I guess.
So most of the songs on the record, are they older songs, more recent songs?
They're actually, a lot of them they're a mix. So like I started writing Yellow Peril back in 2020, but it really didn't come around till I was sitting at the round table with Dan and them. I was looking for kind of a narrative direction and just basic kind of like chorus and stuff like that, and bringing the almost complete puzzle, to Dan and to Pat McLaughlin, another songwriter on this album, really kind of enlightened me into my own capacity as a musician, but also the power in collaboration. Because it's really funny. It's a song about yellowness written by an Asian dude and two white dudes. It's kind of a funny dynamic, and I don't think they approach it sideways or nothing like that. I think they were just really committed to wanting to do something fun, that hit the nail on the head, didn't hit it too hard, ain't preachy, but at the same time maybe has a point to it that's a little deeper than just like a man love a woman or a woman love a man, When it comes to like tricks in or duck and dodging, those are kind of my takes on some developing takes I've done on old songs that I like listening to by Hogman Maxey or Sonny Boy Nelson. So those have been in the tank for a while. A number of the songs we kind of wrote originally, like I wrote 75, 71, probably about a week before we actually cut it in the studio. And, Alvin Youngblood Hart actually came in and we recorded a bunch of, or we just practiced. We just bounced around. I mean, I don't know if you know Alvin, but he's tall as a mountain, he's wide as a mountain, he sings like a mountain. And he's just the kindest dude. So I had the honor of being able to like in real time write a lot of the songs, write a number of songs with him. And it was really great. I used to listen to Big Mama's Door all the time, like let alone being able to sit in a room with him, just like listen to him do Charlie Pack covers. It was really funny actually, like when Alvin left, I was real ginned up, and Dan just turns to me real deadpan, and he's like, I was hoping he would do more Charlie Patton covers. I always thought that was funny.
Tell you what, tell me a little bit more about 75, 71, and then we'll listen to it a little bit.
Oh yeah, I was expounding on it a little earlier, but it's kind of, at least the format and the formula is kind of based off old train songs from Cassie Jones by Furry Lewis. It's sort of like, I don't want to write. I know there's a lot of people hoboing still today and doing a really, actually living the old lifestyle. And I don't know. I think a lot of those travelers are crazy, but I think they were always thought crazy. But there's a lot of people living that life right now. But a lot of that I think a lot of the mystique and romance and nostalgia of train culture and things like that are kind not dead, but I think it's ignorant of me to be like start singing about riding on trains when I never know, like I ain't never ride no blind, you know what I mean? So more to do with kind of like like in the song, one of the fellas talks about taking the L and N, or no, dreaming about the L and N and riding around and things like that. But it's, you know, it's a dream. It's this figment of the imagination. But the song in particular is just kind of about like, I used to love this gal named Sam Hall, like the Johnny Cash song. And I used to do a lot of running up and down the 71 and 75. I took the 71 to the 65 to the 40 to get here. So it's kind of a gateway to the deeper South where I was from. And it forks like, you know, maybe 2 or 3 miles from my home. And it's also kind of a song just about where I was from. You know, I don't know about regionalism, but just like this particular kind of, you know, 50 square mile area in northern Kentucky that I know real familiar, and that I've done a lot of my loving and crying and, you know, raging in. And so that's mainly what the song's about. And I don't know, not trying to make it too heavy or too light, I guess. I don't know if I'm speaking of vagaries or not, but if I had one regret of the album, I wish we could have gotten Alvin back into the studio to do some stuff. It was just such a lightning time when we laid down the tracks. We kind of had a floating date, but we did it in like 3 days. You know, solid like 4 or 5 hour days, like kind of leisurely a little bit. Get there in the morning, get done by the mid-afternoon.
So to backtrack a little bit, you were talking about Dan. Dan is Dan Auerbach from Black Keys.
Yeah.
Who I guess sort of discovered you on YouTube.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. Yeah. He, I think the way he described it to me was he was going fishing. And so he caught something or something like that, you know? So yeah, here I am. Talking with you, Mark.
How did that initial contact happen?
It was actually funny, man. There's two encounters. I woke up one day back in 2021, and I was checking my emails like you do, and I had a spam email. It was like I was checking my spam, and it was an email. It was something worded just like, I don't know if you know Tom Osborne, but if you know Tom, this fits him so well. It was something like, "Hi, my name's Tom Osborne. I'm from Easy Eye Sound, the record label owned by Dan Auerbach." And my first reaction, like anybody's, is like, "No, this guy's trying to steal my money right now. This has nothing to do with none of those names that he just brought up." But then I looked it up, and Tom Osborne was the studio manager. So I was like, okay, like that's some like deep cuts if they're trying to like scam. So I reached out, and he was a real deal. And they flown me out. They flown me down to Nashville. They weren't like trying to like wow me or nothing like that, but I went down to Nashville just to kind of like check the space out. I hadn't met Dan yet, and I don't know if y'all listen to Shannon and the Clams, but I think their guitarist or their drummer or something like that, his name's also Nate. And there was some drama having to do, because during the pandemic, if you didn't get a COVID shot, you couldn't perform none. But I got a call from Dan because Tom had given him my number, thinking that because Dan had asked for Nate's number from Shannon and the Clams, and Tom was like, "Oh, he means Nat Myers," because I just brought him down here. So I got a call from Dan, and Dan was like, "Hey, dude, are you okay?" And I was like, "What up, dude? Like, what do you mean?" Like, he was like, "Wait." He's like, "Is this not Nate from Shannon and the Clams?" It's like, "Nah, it ain't, man." He's like, "Oh," and he just laughed, and he was like, "I'll call you back later," and he just literally hung up on me. but he gave me a call. He gave me a call back. I met him over at the studio. He was hanging with the main production fellow over there named M. Allen Parker, a phenomenal sound engineer. But they were just we were just scouting around. Again, they weren't trying to like wine and dine me. They weren't trying to like flash all their cool stuff at me. And I think after we were hanging for a bit, and we were hanging pretty good, I just kind of asked him point blank what they's about. And Dan really didn't like pause none. He was just like, "Whatever you want to do, man." And so when Dan hit me with that kind of ambiguity, but also that like welcomingness, where it's like, we got no A&R here. That was just like very inspirational to me at a time when I definitely needed it. So I think the one thing about Dan that's very inspiring is, and maybe to a fault, is his persistence and his patience and his desire to work on music. I mean, he works, and he's all about the poetry, and that's what he loves doing, and he acts it out. So it was really cool to be part of that and have him kind of involved in what I was doing too. So yeah.
So tell me about the decision to bring in co-writing partners, which you brought in Alvin Youngblood Hart.
Yeah.
Dan was also a songwriting partner. And then Pat McLaughlin, who not everybody knows, but is a huge songwriter.
Pat McLaughlin. Well, what's really interesting about Dan, again, is that he's taken a lot of these songwriters, you know, who ain't get as much stock. Maybe Pat McLaughlin don't apply, but other musicians who kind of like lost in the shuffle over like, you know, decades and stuff like that have kind of gotten pulled out of the scene, or maybe not living musical lives. And if Dan's turned on to you, like, he doesn't hesitate to reach out. So, you know, I wrote with this fellow named Joe Allen, who played bass with Charlie Pride, Alvin Youngblood Hart, who we both just deeply admire. Pat McLaughlin, Dan himself. So the collaborative process, I was a little worried about it, just in terms of like, I didn't know about, you know, where the pressure points were, where the good graces was, but everybody was just so kind, you know. If they had input, then they had input, and we just like kind of honed it around, found what the best lines were. For some of the more complete songs like 75, 71, like, they just took a back seat, really. I got to give them a lot of credit in terms of like they enabling me to make a sound that's kind of my own, while at the same time having these influences. And I told Dan, I was like, man, I'm so stoked to have all these songs with you. And Pat and Alvin, he's like, you don't need to mention. He's like, if you feel uncomfortable, he's like, you don't need to mention you do. Why wouldn't I mention that? You know. So songwriting's been a curious experience. I think, especially when it comes to Easy Eye, what they like doing is the jazz of the moment. It's very old school in terms of like, yo, come to the studio, no obligation, let's see what we can get, you know. And I think the goose is worth the gander in most cases. So I'm definitely turned on to the idea of bringing some new stuff in. Dan also said something to me. I think it was very sage as well, because I was talking about like maybe showing a little hesitancy. I was talking about wanting to go back a year, or like, you know, just get to myself for another year and kind of pull my Robert Johnson and Arkansas vibe, you know, where it's like really hone down what I'm doing, and come back, you know, and wow everybody. But he said something to me. He's like, he kind of asked me rhetorically. He's like, I used to play with this fella up in Cleveland who knew all the Robert Johnson, knew all the Charlie Patton. He's like, what do you think he's doing right now? And I was like, what? He's like, he's playing the same folk rooms with the same people, to the same Robert Johnson and Charlie Patton covers. And I think, and then he added, he was like, you can keep playing that music forever. It doesn't mean you should like build a wall around what you can make and do. So that was really inspiring to me. I don't think he was talking about collaboration, but even just embracing something like new to me, that was like a nice soft kick, I guess. So.
Did it take you a while? Because, I mean, especially a songwriter who hasn't maybe had much stuff out in the world, they can be kind of precious about their songs. So was that something you had to get over, or were you pretty accepting of it pretty quick? Yeah,
no. Like, I definitely hear them stories about people selling their songs and then, like, writing stipulations, like, you can't change any of the lines in the song. And I always work from edits, like, especially when it comes to poetry. Maybe my poetic understanding kind of informs of how I feel about it. I don't mind cutting 99% of something if it makes the 1% better, you know? And so it's never really been a concern to me about getting rid of lyrics because they're so precious. I mean, words themselves, the fact that we can write them down or sing them in a particular melody and remember that is like such a impossible thing in the first place. It's like, why add this kind of extra level of concreteness to something that really don't have no concrete to it? That's at least like some of my thinking about it. So, yeah.
You mentioned getting to go in the studio, but actually when it came time to make the record, you just went to Dan's hallway.
Yeah.
This was cut at Dan's house outside of Nashville, and
Right.
I guess pretty much all in the foyer.
Yeah, just over in the foyer. Yeah, he invited me down on the last day of songwriting. I was feeling a little nervous. He invited me down to the studio, and all the fellas who worked there, all the audio engineer assistants, Caleb and Tyler and Mickey and Johnny, they was all kind of moving a bunch around, taking stock inventory, taking stuff out of the cars, moving it. And I asked him, like, where we was going. And he was like, I'll tell you tomorrow. And the next morning he texted me his address and invited me down. He lives in this old limestone building, you know, maybe it's kind of Nashville Graceland or something like that. But it's a really beautiful home. It's really old. It's got a lot of history in it. And man, they must have set up, he's got this little side sunroom where Alan had posted up, the sound engineer. And like I mentioned to you, it was like some sort of Lomax daydream where they had like 6 or 7 different ribbon mics to set up all around, like in the stairwells and in the hallways, like at my feet, in a reading room. Like there's so many different mics kind of placed to try to capture all the ambiance that was going on. And those particular days, it was a hot, dry spell. I don't think they had rain for a month or something like that. So it was real hot on them days. But yeah, we cut those records, we cut them slangs in like 3 days. We did 10 songs, 12 songs technically, but we chose 10. Which ain't too bad. When I first went in there, I thought I had to, because I used to listen a lot. I mean, I listen to a lot of 78s, and my understanding about recording doesn't really. I don't know what's going on outside the analog. So I thought I was doing single takes into the mic, and when I learned that it, like, literally, Alan can like through something. If I like, he can seam it together or something like that. I was just like, oh. Okay, but I think a lot of the songs that we got, like Yellow Peril's all one take, 75, 71's one take, Ramble No More, you know, a lot of the songs are one take in the first place, but like the stuff with the accompaniment and things like that, that was a little more complicated. So it took a little longer to get them one takes.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, man.
Done in that night.
Sound easy. Thanks, y'all.